The scream tore through the village, before dawn even touched the hills. Elira Voss dropped the shirt she was mending, and ran barefoot into the cold. Smoke curled from the direction of the old mill. Men shouted. A woman sobbed. And somewhere in the chaos, a wolf howled a sound so full of pain that every dog in the village fell silent at once. She should not have gone closer. Omegas like her were told to stay hidden, stay quiet, stay out of sight when trouble came. But her feet carried her forward anyway, past the frightened crowd gathering at the edge of the square, until she saw him. A man lay crumpled against the well, his shirt torn open, blood darkening the fabric at his shoulder. His hair was black as a raven's wing, damp with sweat, and even in pain, his face held the kind of sharp, commanding beauty that made people step back rather than forward. Nobody in the crowd moved to help him. They only whispered. "That's no ordinary traveler," someone muttered. "Look at his eyes, gold. That's a cursed mark if I ever saw one." Elira did not care what color his eyes were. She had spent her whole life being the one people whispered about, the one they crossed the street to avoid because of the strange mark on her collarbone. She was not about to become one of them now, standing in a circle and doing nothing while a man bled into the dirt. She pushed through the onlookers before anyone could stop her. "Someone bring water and clean cloth," she said, kneeling beside him. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Now please." Nobody moved. The man's eyes opened. Gold, just as they had said, but not frightening. Tired. Human, in a way that made her chest ache. He looked at her, as though she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "You should not be near me," he whispered. His voice was rough, cracked at the edges, but there was an authority buried inside it that she could not explain. "It is not safe." "Neither is bleeding to death in the middle of a square," she said, tearing a strip from her own sleeve and pressing it hard against his shoulder. "Hold still." He hissed in pain but did not pull away. Something about the way his gaze fixed on her face, unwavering, made her fingers tremble even as she worked. It was not fear. She had felt plenty of fear in her life, cold and familiar as an old coat. This was different. This felt like being seen for the very first time, and she did not know what to do with that feeling. "What is your name?" he asked, so quietly only she could hear it. "Elira." "Elira," he repeated, as though testing how the word felt in his mouth. "I am called Castor." Only Castor, for now. She did not know, kneeling there in the dust with her hands stained red, that the man in front of her ruled a kingdom hidden beyond the mountains, that armies bowed when he entered a room, that a curse older than her own grandmother slept coiled inside his chest like a serpent waiting to strike. She only knew that his pain mattered to her, and that surprised her more than anything else that morning. By the time the village healer, a stooped old woman named Bryony, arrived to take over, the man called Castor had lost consciousness. Elira sat back on her heels, her hands shaking now that the urgency had passed, and looked down at the blood drying on her palms. The crowd had not moved closer the entire time. She felt their eyes on her back, heard the murmurs starting again, sharper now. "Touching a stranger's blood, foolish girl. That mark on her neck brings nothing but trouble. Now look, trouble's found her." She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and walked away without a word. She had long ago learned that arguing with whispers only fed them. Elira lived at the very edge of the village, in a small cottage that had belonged to her mother, tucked between the tree line and the old stone wall that marked where the pack's protection technically ended. Nobody enforced that boundary for her. She had grown up understanding, without ever being told outright, that if wolves, or worse, came from the forest one night, no one would rush to defend the Omega girl with the strange mark. She had been 3 years old when her mother, dying of a fever no healer could name, pulled back the collar of Elira's dress and found a symbol etched into the skin above her collarbone, silver and faint, like a scar that had never actually been a wound. 3 crescents circling a single star. "Starlight," her mother had whispered, before the fever took her mind again. "You are marked by starlight, my love. Do not let them make you ashamed of it." But shame had found her anyway. The old superstition ran deep in Vermore and the villages around it. An Omega, marked at birth, without explanation, was thought to bring misfortune. A walking omen nobody wanted near their door. 19 years of that whisper had worn her down slowly, the way water wears down stone. She had stopped expecting kindness. She had stopped expecting to be chosen, courted, or loved, She sewed dresses for women who would not meet her eyes at the market. She fetched water and herbs for Briony in exchange for enough coin to survive. She existed on the edges of everything, and she had made a quiet, aching peace with that. Until this morning. She could not stop thinking about the stranger's gold eyes, or the way he had looked at her as though her hands, and not the healer's herbs, were the thing keeping him tethered to the world. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was gathering firewood near the tree line when she heard footsteps behind her, slow and careful, as though the walker did not want to startle her. She turned, holding a bundle of branches against her chest like a shield, and found him standing a respectful distance away. He was upright now, color returned to his face, his shoulder bound in clean linen beneath a plain brown cloak that did nothing to hide the way he carried himself, straight-backed, watchful, like a man used to danger finding him rather than the other way around. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Properly this time, while I am conscious enough to remember it." "You're supposed to be resting," she said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "Briony will have your hide if she finds you wandering the woods with a wound like that." A faint smile crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Briony has already threatened worse than that. I decided to risk it. To find me, to thank you," he corrected, though something in his gold eyes suggested the two reasons were not so different after all. They stood there a moment, the wind moving through the bare branches above them, and Alira felt the strange, unfamiliar urge to keep him talking, to stretch the silence into something longer than a single conversation. "You said your name was Castor," she said finally. "Just Castor. That's an odd way to introduce yourself." "It is the truest part of my name," he said. "The rest is complicated. Everyone's name is complicated if you dig deep enough. Not like mine." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "May I walk with you?" "Just to the edge of the trees. I promise not to collapse again." She should have said no. Every rule she had been raised on, spoken and unspoken, told her to keep her distance from strangers, especially strangers whose eyes glowed faintly gold in low light, like something not entirely human waiting just beneath the surface. But loneliness was a heavier weight than caution, and she had carried it for so long that the idea of setting it down, even for a few minutes, felt like the first real breath she had taken in years. "Fine," she said, "but you carry the wood. It's the least you can do." His laugh was short and surprised, as though he had not expected to find anything funny that day, or perhaps in a very long time. They walked together in the fading afternoon light, and for the length of that short journey, Alira forgot to feel ashamed of the mark hidden beneath her collar, forgot to brace herself against the whispers that usually followed her everywhere. Castor did not ask about the villagers' stares when they passed close enough to be seen together. He did not flinch away from her the way most people did once they learned who, or what, she was rumored to be. Instead, he asked about her, what she liked to sew, whether she preferred the quiet of the forest or the noise of the market square, which flowers grew wild near her cottage, whether she had ever left the valley in her whole life. Nobody had asked her so many questions in one conversation before. Nobody had seemed to actually want the answers. "I've never left," she admitted, as they reached the low stone wall marking the edge of the village boundary. "There's never been a reason to." "There is a whole world beyond these hills," Castor said quietly, looking toward the horizon where the mountains rose blue and distant. "Sometimes I forget how much of it I have not truly seen either, even though I have traveled more of it than most." "What are you running from?" The question left her mouth before she could stop it, blunt and unguarded in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Castor's expression shifted, something heavy and old moving behind his gold eyes. For a moment, she thought he might simply refuse to answer, the way most people refuse to answer anything real when asked directly. "Myself, mostly," he said at last. "It is a longer story than an afternoon walk can hold." She did not push further. She understood, better than most, what it meant to carry a burden too large and too strange to explain to a stranger in a single conversation. Instead, she set down her bundle of firewood at the wall's edge and looked at him properly, memorizing the shape of his face the way she memorized fabric patterns, carefully, as though she might need to recall every detail later. "Well," she said, "whatever you're running from, I hope you find some peace before it catches you." Something flickered across his face, gratitude maybe, or disbelief that a stranger would offer him something so simple and so sincere. That is a kind thing to say to a man you barely know. I don't have much practice with kindness, Elira admitted. Maybe that's why I don't waste it. He left shortly after that, promising, without her asking, that he would return before he continued on his way. She told herself she did not care whether he kept that promise. She told herself the small flutter in her chest was simply relief that he had survived his injuries, nothing more. She was lying to herself, and some quiet, hopeful part of her already knew it. That night, curled beneath her thin blanket, Elira touched the mark on her collarbone the way she had 1,000 times before, tracing the 3 crescents circling the single star. For the first time in her memory, the mark did not feel like a curse waiting to ruin her life. It felt, instead, like the beginning of something she did not yet have words for. Miles away, in a stone fortress carved into the mountainside, a very different kind of night was unfolding. Advisors paced the halls of Vermore's great keep, their voices low and urgent, while healers hurried between chambers carrying basins of water gone faintly silver, as though moonlight itself had been poured into them. At the center of it all, in a chamber lit only by dying embers, King Castor Draven sat alone, his bandaged shoulder aching less than the deeper wound hidden beneath his ribs, the one no healer in the kingdom had ever been able to touch. He had told the girl in the village half a truth. He was running from himself, yes, but not by choice. 10 years ago, on the night of his coronation, a curse had settled into his blood, like poison poured slowly into wine, and every year since, it had grown stronger, hungrier, closer to consuming the man beneath the crown entirely. He closed his eyes and saw her face again, the healer's assistant with the steady hands and the quiet courage, kneeling in the dirt beside him without a shred of fear in her eyes. He did not know her full story. He did not know about the mark hidden beneath her collar, though he had glimpsed the edge of something silver at her throat and felt, for one strange moment, a pull in his chest he could not explain. He only knew that for the first time in 10 long years, sitting in the mud of a village square with his own blood soaking into the ground, he had felt something close to calm. And Castor Draven, Alpha King of Vermore, had learned the hard way not to trust calm. Every peaceful moment in his life had eventually shattered into something far worse. He intended to enjoy this one anyway, for as long as it lasted. Outside his window, the moon rose full and silver over the mountains, and somewhere deep in his chest, the curse stirred awake, counting down the days until it demanded to be fed again. Castor kept his promise. He returned 3 days later, then again the week after that, always finding some small reason to pass through the quiet village at the edge of the forest. Sometimes he brought dried herbs from the mountain slopes, claiming Bryony had asked for them, though Elira suspected the excuse was thinner than he pretended. Sometimes he simply appeared at the tree line while she gathered water, as though he had been waiting there for hours, hoping she would come. She never asked him to stop coming. She told herself it was only because she had so few visitors that even a strange traveler with golden eyes counted as good company. She told herself many things during those weeks, most of which were not entirely true. "You never talk about where you live," she said one afternoon, as they sat together on the low stone wall, sharing a loaf of bread she had baked that morning, "or where you're going." "I live in a place with too many walls," Castor said, tearing off a piece of bread and studying it instead of her, "and too many people who expect too much of me. That sounds lonely." "It is." He looked up at her then, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Loneliness is easier to carry when nobody around you notices it. You learn to wear it well enough that people stop asking." Elira felt her chest tighten at those words, recognizing herself in them so completely that it startled her. "I know exactly what that feels like." "I imagine you do," he said quietly. "The way the village looks at you, I have noticed." Heat rushed to her face, an old, familiar shame rising before she could stop it. "It's nothing, just old superstition." It did not look like nothing. His voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man unused to being contradicted and yet careful not to push too hard against her. "Whatever they whisper about you, Elira, I have not seen a single reason to believe it." Nobody had ever said something so simply, so directly, in her defense before. She did not know how to respond, so she busied herself with the last of the bread instead, blinking hard against the sudden sting behind her eyes. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. one that felt, to Elira, like the first true friendship she had ever known. He taught her small things about the wider world beyond the valley, the shape of distant coastlines, the names of stars sailors use to navigate open water. She taught him things too, though her knowledge was smaller and closer to home: which herbs eased fever, which threads held strongest against wear, which paths through the forest stayed driest after rain. He never asked about the mark on her collarbone directly, though she caught him glancing at the edge of it sometimes, when her collar shifted, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face before he looked politely away. She was grateful for his restraint. She was not ready to explain a thing she barely understood herself. What she did not know, could not have known, was that every visit chipped away at something ancient and coiled inside him, a curse that fed on isolation and grew quieter, weaker, whenever he sat beside her sharing bread and simple conversation. Castor felt it too, though he did not yet understand why. The nightmares that had plagued him every night for a decade grew softer on the nights following their meetings, as though her presence alone worked some quiet magic he could not name. "You seem different today," she observed one evening, as autumn began cooling the air between them. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel lighter," he admitted. "I have not felt this way in a very long time." "Since when?" He hesitated, weighing how much truth he could offer without revealing everything. "Since before a mistake I made cost me more than I expected to pay." "What mistake?" "I trusted the wrong person," he said simply. "And that trust nearly destroyed everything I was meant to protect." Elira did not press further, sensing the wound behind his words ran deeper than casual conversation could safely touch. Instead, she reached over and rested her hand briefly on his, a small, uncertain gesture that surprised them both. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think whatever you're carrying it well." Castor looked down at her hand covering his, and for one unguarded moment, something in his gold eyes looked almost hopeful, almost young, as though a weight he had carried for 10 long years had shifted just slightly beneath her touch. "Elira," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about myself. Something I have not told anyone in this village." Her heart quickened, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would change everything between them. Before he could continue, though, a horn sounded in the distance, sharp and urgent, echoing off the mountainside. Castor's expression shifted instantly, the softness draining from his face, as something colder, more alert, took its place. He stood so quickly the bread between them scattered into the grass. "I have to go," he said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing you need to worry about." The lie sat awkwardly in his mouth, and she could tell he knew it too. "I will come back, I promise you that." He left before she could argue, moving faster than she thought his still healing shoulder should allow, disappearing into the tree line, with the kind of urgency that spoke of danger she did not understand. Elira sat alone on the wall long after he vanished, staring at the scattered bread and the empty space where he had been. Something had shifted in the air around them, something she could not name, but could feel settling over her like the first chill of coming winter. She did not know that miles away, in the great stone keep of Vermore, the full moon was rising early over the mountains, and Castor Draven was running toward his own chambers as fast as his legs could carry him, praying he would reach the sealed room in time, before the curse inside him tore free and destroyed whatever remained of his careful, borrowed peace. He barely made it. The door slammed shut behind him, just as the change began to claw its way up through his chest, and his advisors, waiting anxiously outside, heard the sounds of a man losing his fight against something far older and far crueler than any ordinary curse deserved to be. By morning, when the change finally released its grip, Castor sat alone in the wreckage of his own chamber, exhausted, bloodied at the knuckles, staring at the pale gray light creeping through the shuttered window. He thought of Elira's hand resting over his, steady and warm, and wondered, not for the first time, how much longer he could keep this second life a secret from the one person who had made him feel human again. He did not yet know that the answer to his curse had already found him weeks ago, kneeling in the village square with steady hands and no fear in her eyes at all. The harvest festival came to the village in the first cold week of autumn, and for once, Elira allowed herself to look forward to something. Brienne had insisted she attend, scolding her gently for spending too many evenings alone in her cottage. "You are young," the old healer said, pressing a woven shawl into her hands. Youth should not smell only of thread and wood smoke. Go. Dance if you want. Eat too much spiced cider. Let yourself be seen for one evening. Being seen was exactly what Elira feared most, but she went anyway, drawn by the small, stubborn hope that Castor might appear among the crowd. He had not visited in over a week, longer than any gap since they had first met, and though he had promised to return, worry had settled into her chest like a stone she could not shake loose. The square blazed with lantern light and the smell of roasted chestnuts. Musicians played near the well, and children chased each other between the stalls, laughing in a way that made the whole village feel, for one evening, like a kinder place than she usually experienced it to be. She kept to the edges as always, watching rather than joining, but even from a distance, the warmth of the festival wrapped around her like something borrowed but welcome. Then she saw him. Castor stood near the far side of the square, his hood pushed back for once, laughing softly at something an elderly farmer had said to him. The sight of him, relaxed and unguarded among strangers, sent a rush of relief through her chest, so strong it nearly stole her breath. She made her way toward him, weaving through the crowd, and he spotted her before she reached him, his whole expression brightening in a way that made her stomach flutter. "You came," he said, as she approached. "You disappeared," she countered, though there was no real accusation in her voice, only relief. "I was starting to think you had left the valley without saying goodbye. I would never do that." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "I told you I would come back." They stood together near the edge of the dancing, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for a while, the rest of the festival faded into background noise. He asked about her week. She told him about a dress she had finished for the miller's daughter, and how the woman had actually smiled at her when she delivered it, a small kindness that had meant more than it probably should have. "People are slow to change," Castor said, "but they do change eventually, when they are given a reason to." "Do you think I will ever stop being the girl with the mark?" she asked, half joking, half genuinely curious what he thought. "I think," he said carefully, "that one day, people will know exactly what your mark means, and they will regret every whisper they ever spent on you." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely, searching his face for the meaning behind the words. Before she could ask what he meant, one of the village children darted between them, chasing a loose ribbon caught on the wind, and knocked squarely into Elira's side. She stumbled, catching herself against a nearby table, and her shawl slipped from her shoulders, pulling her collar askew in the process. For one unguarded second, the silver mark above her collarbone lay exposed beneath the lantern light, plain for anyone standing close enough to see. The reaction was immediate. A woman nearby gasped and stepped back so quickly she knocked over a tray of cups. "The star mark," she said, loud enough to draw attention from every direction. "I always knew there was something wrong with that girl." Whispers rippled outward through the crowd, like water disturbed by a stone. Old fears, half-forgotten superstitions, resurfaced all at once, hungry and eager to attach themselves to something they could point at and blame. "My grandmother used to say, a mark like that brings ruin to whoever looks upon it too long. She has been living among us for 19 years. What if it is already too late?" Elira fumbled to pull her collar back into place, her face burning, her hands trembling with a shame so familiar it felt like an old wound reopening, rather than a new one forming. The music faltered. Dancers slowed, turning to stare. She felt every pair of eyes in the square settle on her at once, and the warmth of the festival evening curdled instantly into something cold and suffocating. "I need to go," she managed, backing away from the crowd, from Castor, from all of it. "Elira, wait." He reached for her arm, but she pulled free, moving faster now, weaving through the crowd toward the darkness beyond the lanterns. She did not stop until she reached the tree line at the edge of the village, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps, tears she refused to let fall burning behind her eyes. 19 years of careful, quiet survival, and one careless moment had undone all of it in front of the entire village. Behind her, footsteps approached, careful and unhurried, and she knew without turning that it was Castor. "You do not need to run from me," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "I already told you. Whatever they believe about that mark, I do not believe it." "You did not see their faces," she said, her voice cracking, despite her best effort to keep it steady. You did not grow up watching every single person you meet decide, before they even know your name, that you are something to fear. No, he admitted, but I know what it feels like to carry something inside yourself that terrifies other people, something you never asked for, and cannot control. He hesitated, then added, more quietly, I know that feeling better than you might imagine. Something in his voice made her finally turn to face him. In the moonlight, his gold eyes seemed to glow faintly, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something like fear behind his usually calm expression. Fear not of her, but for her, or perhaps of what he was about to say. Castor, what are you not telling me? He opened his mouth to answer, and for a moment, she thought he might finally explain everything. The disappearances, the horn that had called him away weeks ago, the shadow that sometimes crossed his face when the moon rose full and bright. But before the words could leave him, a distant howl rose from somewhere deep in the mountains, long and mournful, and his entire body went rigid. Not tonight, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Please, not tonight. What is happening? I have to leave, he said, already backing away toward the darker trees. Elira, I am sorry. I will explain everything, I swear it. But I cannot stay here right now. You keep saying that, she called after him, frustration and hurt mixing sharply in her voice. You keep promising explanations and then disappearing before you give me one. He paused just at the edge of the trees, looking back at her with an expression so full of longing and regret that it stole the anger right out of her chest. I know, he said. And I am asking you to trust me a little longer. Please. Then he was gone, swallowed by shadow and forest, leaving her alone at the edge of the trees, with her heart pounding, and her collar clutched tightly closed against the cold. She did not return to the festival that night. She walked home slowly instead, her mind circling endlessly around every strange detail she had gathered about him over the weeks, the sudden disappearances, the way he flinched whenever the moon was mentioned, the golden eyes that seemed almost too bright to belong to an ordinary man. Whatever Castor was hiding, she realized, standing alone in the cold beneath a sky full of distant, indifferent stars, it was far larger and far stranger than a simple traveler's secret. And whatever her own mark truly meant, some quiet, unfamiliar instinct told her the two mysteries were somehow, impossibly, connected. Days later, word reached the village that the mountain patrol had found torn earth and broken trees near the old mill, the same kind of destruction that had marked the season before, and the one before that. Nobody spoke openly about what caused it. Nobody needed to. Every villager understood, in the quiet way people understand things they are afraid to say aloud, that something dangerous moved through these hills every autumn when the moon grew full and heavy in the sky. Elira found herself watching the horizon more than usual after that, waiting for a glimpse of a familiar cloak among the trees, and dreading, in equal measure, what she might learn if he finally told her the truth. Autumn deepened, and with it came a strange, quiet distance between them, that neither of them chose, but neither of them knew how to close. Castor still visited, though less often now, and always with a careful watchfulness in his eyes that had not been there before the festival. He never fully explained his disappearances, only offered fragments, duties he could not avoid, family obligations too complicated to untangle in an afternoon, responsibilities that pulled him away without warning and without apology. Elira accepted the fragments because the alternative, pushing him away entirely, felt worse than living with unanswered questions. She had spent her whole life being pushed away by others. She was not eager to become someone who did the same to the one person who had never once looked at her with fear. You are quieter than usual today, Castor observed, one gray afternoon, as they walked the familiar path along the tree line. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their boots, and a thin mist clung low to the ground, softening the world around them into something almost dreamlike. I have been thinking, Elira admitted. About the festival? About everything, she said. About you disappearing whenever the moon starts to rise. About the way half this village still crosses the street when they see me coming. About a mark on my collarbone that my own mother never fully explained before she died. She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. I feel like I am surrounded by pieces of a puzzle nobody will let me finish. Castor's expression grew solemn, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, simply watching her with an intensity that made her chest ache with the weight of everything left unsaid between them. "There is a version of my life," he said finally, "where I could tell you everything right now, and it would change nothing between us, except how much you understood me. And there is another version, a darker one, where telling you the truth puts you in more danger than you could imagine." He exhaled slowly. "I am trying to decide which version we are living in." "Let me decide that," Elira said. "Stop deciding it for me." Something in her voice, steady and unafraid despite the fear clearly written across her face, seemed to settle something inside him. He reached out, gently, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary against her cheek. "Soon," he promised. "I swear to you, soon, I will tell you everything. I am simply trying to find a way to do it that does not cost me the only peace I have known in 10 years. 10 years, she repeated softly. That is a very specific number for a man who claims his troubles are complicated. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, sad and tired, but genuine. "You notice everything, do you not?" "I have had a lot of practice noticing things nobody wants me to see," she said. "It is the one advantage of being invisible most of my life." "You are not invisible to me," he said quietly. "I do not think I have ever seen anyone as clearly as I see you." The words settled over her like warmth after a long cold winter, and for a moment, standing together in the misty afternoon light, the distance between them seemed to close entirely. She found herself studying his mouth, wondering, for the first time in her sheltered, lonely life, what it might feel like to close the last few inches between them and simply kiss him. She had never been kissed, not once, not by anyone. The village boys had never dared approach the girl with the strange mark, and she had long ago stopped hoping anyone ever would. But standing here, with Castor's eyes fixed so intently on her face, the old ache of that loneliness felt, briefly, like something that might finally be answered. Castor seemed to sense the shift in the air between them too. He leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips for the briefest moment, before he caught himself and pulled back, a flicker of something like fear crossing his features. "Not yet," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Why not?" The question came out softer than she intended, more vulnerable than she usually allowed herself to be. "Because," he said carefully, "some things carry more weight than either of us realizes, and I refuse to let you give something so precious to a man still hiding half of who he truly is." The rejection stung, though she understood, somewhere beneath the hurt, that it was not truly a rejection at all. It was restraint, careful and deliberate, the kind that came from a man trying to protect her from something she could not yet see. "Then hurry up and stop hiding," she said, trying to lighten the moment, even as her heart still ached from the near miss. "I am not a patient person, whatever anyone tells you." His laugh, when it came, was warm and real, chasing away some of the tension that had gathered between them. "Nodded," he said. "I will do my best." They walked back toward the village, as the mist thickened around them, and though neither spoke of the almost kiss again that day, it lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable, a promise neither of them was ready to break yet, and neither was ready to fully claim either. That night, alone in her cottage, Elira lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. She thought of his hesitation, the careful way he had pulled back, the strange weight he seemed to place on something as simple as a kiss. She did not know, could not have known, that somewhere in the ancient texts, locked away in the royal archives of Vermore, a prophecy written centuries ago spoke of exactly this moment, a king cursed by betrayal, and an omega marked by starlight, whose first kiss, freely given, would either break the curse forever or bind it deeper than any healer could undo. Castor knew. He had read the words himself 100 times since the oracle first pointed him toward their meaning, and that knowledge was precisely why he had pulled away that afternoon, terrified not of the curse breaking, but of asking for something so intimate, so sacred, from a woman who did not yet know the true cost of giving it. He wanted her first kiss to be given out of love, not desperation. He wanted her to choose him, fully and freely, not because a prophecy demanded it, but because her heart did. And so he waited, carrying his secret a little longer, even as the moon above the mountains grew fuller with each passing night. counting down toward a reckoning neither of them could avoid forever. Inside the great stone keep of Vermore, far beyond the mountains that sheltered Illyra's quiet village, an old woman sat hunched over a table covered in scrolls, her cloudy eyes tracing lines of faded ink that had not been read aloud in generations. Lysandra, the royal oracle, had served 3 kings before Castor, and in all her long years of service, she had never seen a curse cling so stubbornly to a single bloodline. She looked up as the doors to her chamber opened, and Castor entered, his cloak still damp from travel, his expression tight with barely restrained urgency. "You sent for me," he said. "Your message said it was important." "It is." Lysandra gestured toward the scrolls spread before her. "I have been studying the mark you described, the one you say you saw on the girl's collarbone. 3 crescents, circling a single star." Castor's chest tightened. And I believe, Your Majesty, that we have been looking for the wrong kind of person entirely." Lysandra tapped a weathered finger against a passage of ancient text. "The prophecy speaks of one forgotten by fate, marked by starlight. For 10 years, my predecessors and I assumed this meant someone hidden among nobility, someone deliberately concealed for their own protection. We searched bloodlines, we searched noble houses, we searched everywhere, except among those the world chooses to overlook entirely." "An Omega," Castor said slowly, understanding dawning cold and heavy in his chest. "Someone forgotten, not by careful design, but by simple, cruel neglect." "Precisely." Lysandra's eyes met his, sharp despite their clouded surface. "Tell me about this girl." Castor hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect Illyra's privacy and the desperate need to finally understand what connected her to the curse eating away at his own life. Slowly, he told the oracle everything, the way he had found her kneeling beside him in the village square, unafraid, despite the whispers already forming around them. The mark hidden beneath her collar, the way the curse's grip on him had loosened, however slightly, every time he sat beside her. Lysandra listened without interruption, her expression growing graver with each detail. When he finished, she sat back in her chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. "It is her," she said simply. "It has to be her. You cannot be certain of that from a description alone. I have studied this prophecy for 40 years, Your Majesty. I know its words better than I know my own name." Lysandra rose slowly, crossing to a locked cabinet at the far side of the chamber, retrieving a single, ancient scroll sealed with wax that had cracked with age. "The curse placed upon you was never meant to be permanent. It was designed with an escape, woven into its very foundation, a cruelty typical of the one who cast it. Only true, freely given love could break it, not love offered out of duty or desperation, but love chosen, without any awareness of the stakes involved." "Which is why I have not told her the truth," Castor said quietly. "Wise, and dangerous in equal measure," Lysandra replied. "The longer you wait, the more the curse strengthens. You already feel it growing worse, do you not? The moon claims more of you each month than it did the month before." Castor did not answer, but the tightness in his jaw told her everything she needed to know. "There is more," Lysandra continued, unrolling the ancient scroll carefully across the table. "The prophecy specifies a kiss, Your Majesty. Not simply love, but her first kiss specifically, given freely, without coercion or knowledge of what it would unleash. If she gives it out of true feeling, unaware of the prophecy, the curse breaks entirely. But if she learns the truth first, and gives the kiss believing it obligated of her, even out of love for you, the curse may only deepen instead, twisting the very magic meant to free you into something far crueler." The weight of that information settled over Castor like a physical burden. He thought of the moment weeks ago, standing with Illyra in the misty afternoon light, when he had pulled away from the kiss they both so clearly wanted, terrified of exactly this outcome. "So I cannot tell her," he said. "Not the full truth, not until it is already done. That is my counsel, yes." Lysandra's expression softened slightly, sympathy breaking through her usual stern composure. "I understand the cruelty of what I am asking. You must let her choose you completely, without knowing that her choice carries the weight of your entire kingdom's future. It is not a fair burden to place on any young woman's shoulders, whether she knows it or not. And if I fail, if the moon claims me completely before she chooses freely?" Lysandra's silence answered the question more clearly than words could have. Castor left the oracle's chamber that evening, carrying a weight heavier than any he had known since the night of his coronation 10 years ago, when the curse had first settled into his blood, like poison poured slowly into wine. He walked the halls of his own keep like a stranger in his own home, his mind consumed entirely by thoughts of Illyra, of her steady hands and her fearless kindness, of a mark she did not yet understand carved into her skin by a fate she had never chosen. He found himself standing before a tall window overlooking the mountains, watching the moon rise, still a few days from full but growing rounder every night, a silent countdown ticking toward a reckoning he could not avoid. 10 years ago, betrayal had sealed this curse into his blood. A trusted advisor, envious of the throne he would never inherit himself, had turned to dark magic in a desperate bid for power, cursing Castor on the very night of his coronation, binding his wolf into torment that grew worse with every passing full moon. The advisor had been executed for his crime, but the curse he wove remained, ancient and cruel, feeding on isolation, on distance, on every wall Castor built between himself and the world to keep others safe from the danger inside him. And now, after 10 long years of solitary suffering, fate had placed the answer directly in his path, wrapped in kindness and quiet courage, utterly unaware of the role she had been born to play. He closed his eyes and thought of her laugh, soft and surprised, as though she had forgotten she was capable of such a sound, until he gave her reason to remember. He thought of her hand resting over his beneath the stone wall, steady despite everything she did not know about him. He would protect her, he decided, standing alone before the rising moon. Whatever it cost him, whatever the curse eventually demanded, he would not let Illyra become a sacrifice offered up to save him. If the prophecy required her heart, then he would earn it honestly, slowly, without ever asking her to give more than she chose to give on her own. Even if that meant risking everything, including his own life, to protect her from the truth a little longer. The moon climbed higher above the mountains, indifferent to the promises made beneath it, and somewhere deep in Castor's chest, the curse stirred restlessly, sensing, perhaps, that its long reign over him was finally, dangerously, nearing its end. Winter arrived early that year, dusting the mountains with a pale layer of frost that crept down into the valley overnight. Illyra woke to find her cottage windows painted with delicate patterns of ice, and for a moment, wrapped warm beneath her blanket, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the quiet beauty of it, before the day's worries returned. Castor found her later that morning, gathering kindling near the tree line, her breath fogging in the cold air. He looked different somehow, she thought, watching him approach, older around the eyes than a man his age should look, as though he carried a weight he had not fully set down in years. "You look tired," she said, when he reached her. "I have not been sleeping well," he admitted, surprising her with his honesty. Usually he deflected such questions with a joke or a change of subject. Nightmares, mostly. "They grow worse this time of year. Do you want to talk about them?" He considered her offer for a long moment, something conflicted passing behind his gold eyes. "Not yet," he said finally. "But soon, I think. Sooner than I originally planned." They walked together in comfortable silence for a while, the frost crunching softly beneath their boots, until Castor spoke again, his voice more serious than usual. "Illyra, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the question seems strange." "All right. If you learned something about your own life, something significant that had been hidden from you your entire life, would you want to know it immediately, even if learning it changed everything, even if it came with a burden attached that you never asked to carry?" Illyra stopped walking, studying his face carefully. "Is this about my mark?" "It is about many things," he said carefully. "But yes, in part." She thought about the question seriously, understanding that he was asking for more than a casual opinion, that whatever prompted this conversation carried real weight behind it. "I have spent my whole life not knowing why I was marked the way I was," she said finally. "My mother died before she could ever fully explain it. I have lived 19 years, wrapped in shame, over something I never understood and never chose. If there is a truth out there that explains any of it, yes, Castor, I would want to know it. Even if it changed everything, especially if it changed everything." Something in his expression shifted. Relief and fear tangled together so closely she could not tell which emotion won out. Even if the truth put you in danger. Danger is not new to me, she said simply. Uncertainty is worse. At least danger, I can prepare for. Castor reached out and took her hand, his fingers cold from the winter air, but his grip warm and steady. I am going to tell you everything, he said. Soon. I promise you that. I only need a little more time to make certain telling you does not put you at greater risk than staying silent. You keep saying soon, Alira said, though her voice carried less frustration than it once had. Something softer replacing it now. Something that looked almost like trust. I have decided to believe you mean it this time. I do, he said. I swear I do. He lifted her hand gently and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, an old-fashioned gesture that felt, in that moment, more intimate than anything else that had passed between them so far. Alira felt her face warm despite the cold, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the ache of loneliness she had carried her entire life felt, briefly, like something she might finally be free of. They spent the rest of the morning together, gathering wood and talking of smaller things, the coming winter, the festival that would mark the new year in a few months, small hopes and plans that neither of them dared examine too closely for what they truly meant. When Castor finally left as the sun began climbing higher, he paused at the tree line and turned back to look at her one more time. Whatever happens, he said, I need you to know that these past months with you have meant more to me than anything else in my entire life. Whatever comes next, please remember that. The words carried a weight that unsettled her, a finality she did not fully understand, but before she could ask him to explain, he was gone, disappearing into the trees with the careful, practiced ease of a man used to slipping away before anyone could question him further. That evening, Bryony visited Alira's cottage, carrying a basket of dried herbs and an expression more serious than her usual brisk efficiency. I have heard troubling talk in the village, the old healer said, settling into the chair by Alira's small hearth. About the man you have been spending your time with. What kind of talk? Talk that he is not who he claims to be. Bryony's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. A traveling merchant does not carry himself the way that man carries himself, girl. I have seen enough of the world in my long life to recognize authority when it walks through my door, disguised as something humbler. Alira's heart quickened. Old suspicions she had been quietly nursing for weeks, suddenly given voice by someone else. What are you saying, Bryony? I am saying, the old woman replied carefully, that I believe the man calling himself simply Castor may in fact be the Alpha King of Vermore himself, traveling in secret for reasons only he understands. The words settled over Alira like a physical blow, pieces of the puzzle she had been collecting for months, suddenly rearranging themselves into a shape she had never quite dared imagine. The sudden disappearances, the way he flinched at any mention of the full moon, the unmistakable authority beneath his humble disguise, the oracle he had mentioned in passing, quickly correcting himself as though he had said too much, the way the villagers, when they finally noticed him closely enough, whispered about presence rather than appearance. If that is true, Alira said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, why would a king spend months visiting an Omega nobody else in this village will even look at directly? Bryony reached over and took her hand, her weathered fingers surprisingly gentle. I do not know the answer to that, child, but I know that whatever draws a king back to your door month after month, it is not something either of you should keep hidden much longer. Secrets like this have a way of turning dangerous, especially the longer they are allowed to fester. Alira sat awake long after Bryony left, staring into the dying embers of her hearth, turning the revelation over and over in her mind. If Castor truly was the Alpha King, hidden beneath a traveler's cloak, then everything about their months together took on new weight, new danger, new impossible complications she had never allowed herself to consider. And if he was a king, hiding his identity for reasons he refused to fully explain, what did that mean for the strange, fearful way he spoke of the future whenever the topic of full moons arose? She touched the mark on her collarbone, tracing the familiar shape of the 3 crescents in single star, and for the first time in her life, wondered if perhaps it was not a curse she carried at all, but a key to a lock she had not yet discovered how to open. 3 days passed before Castor returned, and when he did, Alira was waiting for him at the tree line, before he had even fully emerged from the trees. her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, in a way that immediately told him something had changed. "I know who you are," she said, before he could offer any greeting. Castor went very still, his gold eyes searching her face for some clue as to how much she actually knew and how she had discovered it. "Elira, you are the Alpha King," she continued, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotion clearly churning beneath the surface. "Aren't you? All this time, all these months of quiet walks and shared bread and promises of soon, and you never once thought to simply tell me the truth." He did not deny it. There was no point, and he had never truly wanted to lie to her in the first place, only to protect her, though he understood now, watching the hurt flash across her face, that protection and deception often wore the exact same disguise. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am King Castor Draven of Veremore. I should have told you from the very beginning." "Then why didn't you?" "Because the moment people learn who I truly am, everything changes," he said. "They stop seeing me and start seeing the crown instead. I wanted, just once, to be seen as simply a man. You gave me that, Elira, more than anyone has in 10 years, and I was terrified that the truth would take it away. So instead, you let me fall for a lie." The word landed hard between them, and Castor flinched, as though she had struck him. "You did not fall for a lie," he said. "Everything I told you, every conversation, every moment we shared, all of it was true. My name is Castor. That much was never false. I simply left out the title attached to it. That is a very convenient distinction for a king to make." "I know it does not sound like much of a difference from where you are standing," he admitted. "But I need you to understand, Elira, that nothing about how I feel for you has ever been a performance. Everything real between us was exactly as real as it felt." Elira studied him for a long, tense moment, torn between the anger simmering in her chest and the aching, undeniable truth that even now, knowing what he had hidden from her, she still wanted desperately to believe him. "There is more, isn't there?" she said finally. "Something bigger than simply hiding your title. Branny said something about a curse, about the reasons you disappear whenever the moon rises." Castor closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing himself for something he had dreaded for months. When he opened them again, his expression carried a weariness that went far deeper than mere lack of sleep. 10 years ago," he said, "on the night of my coronation, a man I trusted completely, an advisor who had served my family for decades, cursed me out of envy and ambition. He wanted the throne for himself, and could not have it while I lived, so he found another way to destroy me instead. The curse binds my wolf, twists it into something violent and uncontrollable whenever the moon grows full. Each year it grows stronger, harder to contain. I have spent a decade hiding this truth from the world, terrified of what would happen if my own kingdom learned their king could not fully control the beast inside him." Elira's anger softened slightly, replaced by something closer to horrified sympathy. "That is why you flinch every time the moon is mentioned. Why you disappear so suddenly, without warning." "Yes." He took a careful step closer, watching her face for any sign that she wanted him to stop. When she did not step back, he continued. "There is a prophecy, Elira, an old one, written long before I was even born, that speaks of the only way this curse can ever be broken. It speaks of someone forgotten by fate, marked by starlight." Her breath caught, understanding beginning to dawn even before he finished speaking. Her hand rose instinctively to her collarbone, to the mark hidden just beneath the fabric of her dress. "Me," she whispered. "You think the prophecy means me?" "I do not simply think it," Castor said gently. "The oracle confirmed it weeks ago. 3 crescents circling a single star. It is an exact match to the description in the ancient text." Elira stumbled back a step, her mind reeling under the weight of everything he had just revealed. 19 years of shame, of whispered superstition, of feeling like a walking omen nobody wanted near their door, and now she learned the truth was almost the exact opposite of what she had always believed. Her mark was not a curse at all, it was the answer to one. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" she asked, her voice trembling now, anger and confusion, and something that felt uncomfortably close to fear, all tangled together at once. "Why let me wander into this blindly?" "Because the prophecy requires something very specific," Castor said carefully. "It requires your first kiss, given freely, out of true feeling, without any awareness of what it would unleash. If you kissed me knowing the truth, believing it your duty or obligation, the curse might only deepen instead of breaking. The oracle warned me that telling you too soon could destroy any chance we have of ever setting this curse free. Understanding, and a fresh wave of hurt, crashed over Alira all at once. So you were using me, she said quietly. All those months. Every walk, every conversation, every moment I thought meant something between us. You were simply waiting for me to fall in love with you so your curse would break. No, Castor's voice cracked with something raw and desperate. Alira, I swear to you, that is not what happened. I fell for you long before I ever connected you to the prophecy. The oracle only confirmed what I already suspected weeks after we met, after I had already begun caring for you as simply yourself. Nothing more, nothing less. I did not court you for the sake of breaking a curse. I nearly refused to pursue anything further between us, precisely because I did not want you to ever feel used the way you feel right now. Then why tell me any of this at all? Why not simply let the moment happen naturally, without ever revealing the stakes? Because you deserve to make your own choices, Castor said. Even if telling you the truth destroys any chance the curse ever breaks, I refuse to steal your ability to choose freely, with full knowledge of what you are choosing. I would rather remain cursed forever than take that choice away from you. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile, while Alira wrestled with the enormity of everything she had just learned. She thought of her mother's dying words, the mark of starlight she had carried her whole life without understanding, the years of shame that had, impossibly, been hiding a truth far larger than anyone around her had ever imagined. I need time, she said finally. Time to think about all of this, about you, about what any of it truly means. Take whatever time you need, Castor said quietly, though the fear in his voice was unmistakable. I will not push you toward a choice you are not ready to make. Whatever you decide, Alira, I need you to know that these months with you have already given me more peace than I have known in a decade, regardless of what happens next. He left her standing alone at the tree line, the weight of an ancient prophecy and a kingdom's future settling onto shoulders that had spent 19 years believing themselves cursed, unlovable, forgotten. For the first time, standing there in the cold winter air with the truth finally laid bare before her, Alira allowed herself to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong about herself for her entire life. Perhaps she had never been forgotten by fate at all. Perhaps fate had simply been waiting, patiently, for the right moment to remind her exactly how important she had always been. Alira did not see Castor for nearly a week after the truth came out, and in that silence, she found herself examining every corner of her own life with a clarity she had never allowed herself before. She thought about the years of shame, the whispered superstitions, the isolation she had accepted, as simply the shape her life was destined to take. She thought about her mother's final words, spoken through a fever that had already begun stealing her from the world, insisting that Alira should never let the mark make her ashamed. For 19 years, Alira had failed to honor that request, carrying the shame anyway, because it had felt safer than hoping for anything better. Now, faced with the possibility that the mark had never been a curse at all, but a piece of something far larger and far more important, she found the old shame beginning to loosen its grip, replaced slowly by something unfamiliar and cautiously hopeful. She spent her days as she always had, sewing dresses, gathering herbs for Bryony, tending the small garden behind her cottage as winter settled deeper into the valley. But her mind returned constantly to Castor, to the desperate honesty in his voice when he had sworn he had not used her, to the years of solitary suffering etched into his tired gold eyes. She believed him. That was the truth she arrived at, slowly, over the course of that long, quiet week. Whatever complications the prophecy added to their story, she believed that what had grown between them over the past months had been real, chosen freely by both of them, long before either of them understood what the future held. The decision to return to him did not come as a single dramatic moment. It came instead as a quiet, steady certainty that grew stronger each day, until one gray morning, she found herself walking toward the mountain path that led, she now knew, toward the great stone keep of Vermore itself. She had never traveled beyond the valley in her entire life, and the journey felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. each step carrying her further from the only world she had ever known, and closer towards something she could not yet fully imagine. She reached the outskirts of the keep as afternoon light began fading toward evening, and found the grounds in a state of quiet, controlled panic. Guards moved with urgent purpose between buildings. Healers hurried across the courtyard carrying baskets of herbs and clean linen. And above it all, the moon, though not yet full, hung heavy and pale in the darkening sky, closer to completion than Alira had realized. A young guard stopped her at the gate, his expression wary. "The keep is closed to visitors tonight. The moon rises full tomorrow, and the king—" He stopped himself, catching the slip too late. "I need to see him," Alira said firmly. "Please, it is urgent." Something in her tone, or perhaps the mark visible just above her collar where her scarf had slipped in her haste, made the young guard hesitate. "Wait here," he said finally, before disappearing through the gate. He returned moments later, with an older woman, Alira recognized instantly, though they had never formally met, the same clouded, sharp eyes described to her weeks ago. The Oracle. "You must be Alira," Lysandra said, studying her with unmistakable relief. "Thank the stars you have come. We feared he had frightened you away entirely. Is he all right?" Lysandra's expression grew grave. "The curse has grown worse this year, faster than any year before it. He has been fighting it alone for a decade, and I fear his strength is finally beginning to fail him. Tomorrow's full moon may be the one he cannot survive unchanged." Alira's chest tightened with fear sharper and more immediate than any confusion or hurt she had carried over the past week. "Take me to him, now." Lysandra led her quickly through the keep's winding stone corridors, explaining as they walked the full weight of what tomorrow's moon threatened. The curse had grown stronger every year since its casting, and this year, weakened further by the emotional strain of the past months, Castor's ability to contain the change had reached its breaking point. If the curse consumed him completely tomorrow night, the healers feared he might never fully return to himself again, trapped instead in the tormented, uncontrollable form the curse had always threatened to create. "There is still a chance," Lysandra said, stopping outside a heavy wooden door. "If you are truly here of your own choosing, freely, without obligation weighing on your heart." "I am here because I love him," Alira said, the words surprising her with how certain they felt, spoken aloud for the first time. "Whatever complications come with that, whatever the prophecy demands, I am not here out of duty. I am here because these past months were the first time in my entire life I felt like I mattered to someone." Something in Lysandra's weathered face softened, relief and cautious hope replacing the worry that had lined it moments before. "Then go to him," she said. "Whatever happens tonight and tomorrow, let him know you came back." Alira pushed open the door and found Castor seated alone before a dying fire, his shoulders slumped with an exhaustion that went far deeper than physical tiredness. He looked up as she entered, and the raw disbelief that crossed his face nearly broke her heart entirely. "Alira," he breathed, rising quickly from his chair. "You came back." "I never should have left," she said, closing the distance between them. "I needed time to understand everything, but I never should have let you think, even for a moment, that I was truly gone." "I would have understood if you had stayed away," he said quietly. "What I asked of you, what fate has asked of you, it is an unfair burden to place on anyone." "You did not ask me for anything," Alira said. "You told me the truth, and then let me choose. That is different from asking, Castor. That is trusting me enough to decide for myself." She reached up and gently touched his face, feeling the exhaustion and strain etched into every line of it. "And I choose you, not because of some ancient prophecy, because of every quiet walk and shared loaf of bread and honest conversation these past months. Because you are the first person in my entire life who looked at my mark and saw something worth protecting instead of something to fear." Castor's breath caught, his gold eyes bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. "Alira, I need you to understand what tomorrow night means. The moon rises full, and the curse will demand everything I have left to resist it. I do not know if I will survive it unchanged, prophecy or not." "Then we face it together," she said firmly. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, I am not leaving your side again." They spent that evening together in quiet conversation, no longer burdened by secrets or hidden truths, simply two people who had found something rare and precious in each other, determined to face whatever tomorrow brought without regret. Castor told her stories of his childhood, before the curse, before the betrayal that had stolen a decade of peace from him. Elira told him about her mother, about the mark she had carried in shame for so long, finally beginning to understand its true weight and meaning. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, Castor took her hand gently in his. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that meeting you, even disguised as I was, even with all the complications that followed, was the greatest gift these past 10 years have given me. Then let's make sure tomorrow gives us many more years to be grateful for," Elira said, squeezing his hand tightly. Outside the window, the moon climbed higher above the mountains, one night away from full, one night away from the reckoning that would determine everything that came after. The full moon rose over Vermore the following night, pale and merciless, spilling silver light across the mountains and down into the courtyard, where the entire keep had gathered in tense, watchful silence. Castor stood at the center of the courtyard, stripped of his usual composure, his breathing already ragged as the first tremors of the curse began stirring beneath his skin. Lysandra stood nearby, ancient scrolls clutched in her weathered hands, murmuring old protective words meant to slow the change, though everyone present understood such measures had grown less effective with each passing year. Elira stood close enough to see the pain beginning to twist across Castor's face, the way his gold eyes flickered between clarity and something wilder, something struggling to break free from beneath the surface of the man she had come to love. "It is starting earlier than usual," Lysandra said grimly, watching the moon climb higher. "The curse senses how weakened his resistance has grown this year." "What do I do?" Elira asked, fear sharpening every word. "Stay close," Lysandra said. "Whatever happens, do not run from him. Fear only feeds the curse further." Castor's knees buckled suddenly, a pained groan tearing from his chest as the change began forcing its way through his body, bones and muscle straining beneath skin that seemed to fight the transformation with every ounce of will he had left. Advisors and guards took an instinctive step back, but Elira moved closer instead, kneeling beside him, the way she had the very first day they met, months ago, in a village square stained with his blood. "Castor," she said firmly, taking his face in her hands. "Look at me. Stay with me." His gold eyes found hers, glassy with pain but still, impossibly, still him. "Elira," he managed, his voice strained and rough. "It is too strong this time. I do not think I can hold it back." "You do not have to hold it back alone," she said. "I am right here." The transformation surged forward again, and this time Castor cried out, his back arching as something dark and violent pulled at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to drag him under completely. Around them, the courtyard erupted into fearful murmurs, guards shifting nervously, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. Lysandra's voice cut through the chaos, urgent and commanding. "Now, child, if you are ever going to choose him now, before the moon claims him entirely." Elira did not hesitate. She had spent 19 years hesitating, shrinking away from a life that had always felt too dangerous, too uncertain to fully claim. She was done hesitating now. She cupped Castor's face gently between her hands, steadying him despite the tremors racking his body, and looked directly into his eyes, gold and wild and still, beneath all of it, achingly familiar. "I love you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, despite the chaos surrounding them. "Not because of any prophecy, not because a mark on my collarbone demands it. I love you because you are the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered, exactly as I am." Then, without waiting for his response, without waiting for permission or ceremony or anything beyond the simple, undeniable truth in her own heart, Elira closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was her first kiss, and she gave it freely, completely, with nothing held back and no thought of prophecies or curses or ancient texts written centuries before either of them had been born. She gave it because she loved him, plainly and simply, and because in that moment, nothing else in the entire world mattered, beyond the man trembling beneath her hands. The mark on her collarbone flared to sudden, brilliant light, silver and blinding, 3 crescents circling a single star, blazing like captured starlight against her skin. The courtyard gasped collectively as the light spread outward, wrapping around both of them in a column of radiance that turned night briefly, impossibly, into something resembling dawn. Castor's cry of pain shifted, transformed into something else entirely, a sound of release rather than agony, as the curse that had gripped him for 10 long years shattered apart like glass struck by a sudden, decisive blow. The wild fracture in his gold eyes smoothed away, replaced by clarity so complete and so peaceful that several of the older guards who remembered him before the curse found themselves weeping openly at the sight of it. The light faded slowly, leaving the courtyard bathed once more in ordinary moonlight, quiet and pale and utterly changed. Castor knelt there, whole, breathing steadily, his hands still cradling Alira's face, as though he could not quite believe she was real. "It is gone," he whispered, wonder and disbelief mixing thickly in his voice. "Alira, I can feel it. The curse is gone." Tears spilled freely down Alira's cheeks, relief and joy tangling together, so completely she could barely speak. "You are free," she managed. "Castor, you are truly free." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her so tightly it nearly stole her breath, and the entire courtyard erupted into cheers and disbelieving laughter. A decade of quiet suffering finally, gloriously, ended. Lysandra approached slowly, her ancient scrolls forgotten at her feet, tears tracking down her weathered face. 10 years, she said softly. 10 years, I have waited to witness this moment. And I confess, Your Majesty, I feared I might never see it at all. None of it would have happened without her, Castor said, still holding Alira close, still unable to fully release her from his arms. She chose me freely, exactly as the prophecy required, without ever knowing the true weight of what her choice would mean. I knew, Alira corrected gently, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. You told me everything, remember? I chose you, knowing exactly what my kiss might do. You chose me anyway, Castor said, wonder still thick in his voice. Knowing the stakes, knowing the risk, you chose me anyway. I told you, she said, a small, teary smile breaking through despite everything. I am not a patient person. I was not about to wait around forever for you to figure out you loved me too. His answering laugh was full and unguarded, the laugh of a man finally free of a burden he had carried for a full decade, and he kissed her again, softer this time, slower, no longer racing against a prophecy or a curse, but simply savoring the quiet miracle of a love finally allowed to exist in the open, without secrets, without shadows, without fear. Around them, the courtyard continued celebrating long into the night, guards and advisors and healers alike, gathering to witness the moment their king's decade of suffering finally came to its long overdue end. And at the center of it all stood Alira, once the forgotten Omega, once the girl shamed by whispers and superstition, now standing proudly beside the man she loved, her mark blazing faintly silver in the moonlight, no longer a curse to be hidden, but a gift finally, fully understood. The moon shone down on them both, full and bright, and, for the first time in 10 years, utterly harmless. Word of what happened beneath the full moon spread through Vermore faster than any messenger could carry it, faster even than the wind moving through the mountain passes. Within days, every village in the kingdom, including the small quiet one at the edge of the forest where Alira had spent her entire life feeling invisible, had heard the story of the Omega whose kiss shattered a decade-old curse and restored their king completely. The villagers who had once whispered about her mark, who had crossed the street to avoid her, who had gasped in horror at the festival months earlier, now spoke her name with an entirely different tone, reverence mixed with something close to shame of their own. Bryony, who had never once treated Alira with anything but kindness, simply smiled knowingly when the news reached her, unsurprised that the girl she had watched grow up had always carried something far greater inside her than anyone else had bothered to notice. Castor insisted on returning to the village himself, not disguised this time, but fully as himself, crown and all, to formally address the people who had shamed the woman he loved for 19 years. He stood in the same square where he had first collapsed, bleeding, into Alira's steady hands, and spoke to the gathered crowd with a clarity and authority that left no room for argument. For 10 years, this kingdom suffered under a curse. None of you fully understood, he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent square. And for 19 years, this village shamed a woman for a mark that was never a curse at all, but a gift, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true purpose. I stand before you today, whole and free, because of Alira Voss, a woman this village chose to overlook, to fear, to isolate, simply because she carried something none of you understood. He turned then, extending his hand toward Alira, who stood a short distance away, dressed simply as always, though the way she carried herself now held none of the old shame that had once made her shrink from public attention. I have asked Alira to stand beside me, not simply as the woman who broke my curse, but as the woman I love, completely and without condition, prophecy or no prophecy. Castor continued. She will be crowned Queen of Vermore in the coming season, and I expect this village, and every village in this kingdom, to treat her with the respect and honor she has always deserved, long before any of you understood why. The crowd erupted into applause, some of it, Alira suspected, born from genuine joy at the miracle that had unfolded, and some of it, born from the simple human instinct to align oneself quickly with whoever now held power and favor. She did not begrudge them the shift, though she noticed it clearly enough. She had spent too many years being shaped by other people's opinions to let their sudden reversal define her sense of worth now. What mattered, she realized, standing beside Castor in the square, where her whole life had once felt so small and so shameful, was not whether the village finally approved of her. What mattered was that she had finally, fully, learned to approve of herself. In the months that followed, Alira transitioned slowly into her new role, learning the customs and responsibilities of court life, with the same quiet determination she had once brought to sewing dresses for women who would not meet her eyes. She insisted on using her new position to change the old superstitions that had shaped so much of her early life, establishing new protections for Omegas across the kingdom, who had been marked in ways they did not understand, ensuring no other child would grow up carrying 19 years of unnecessary shame the way she had. Lysandra remained a close advisor and, eventually, a genuine friend, teaching Alira the deeper history of the mark she carried, the old magic of starlight bloodlines, nearly forgotten by most of the kingdom, magic that had chosen, long before Alira's birth, to weave itself into her very skin, waiting patiently for the moment it would finally matter. Castor, freed at last from the weight he had carried for a decade, became known throughout the kingdom not simply as a powerful king, but as a genuinely present one, no longer distracted by the constant, exhausting effort of containing something dangerous inside himself. He ruled with a warmth and clarity that had been buried beneath the curse for so long that even his oldest advisors remarked on how different, how whole he seemed. On the evening of their wedding, held beneath a clear winter sky, in the same courtyard where the curse had finally broken, Alira stood at Castor's side, wearing a dress she had designed and sewn herself, insisting on this one tradition from her old life, even as she stepped fully into her new one. "Do you ever think about that morning?" she asked him quietly, as the celebration continued around them. "The day you collapsed in the village square, and everyone else just stood there, too afraid to help?" "Every day," Castor admitted, wrapping an arm gently around her waist. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently, if you had listened to the whispers instead of your own heart, if you had walked away instead of kneeling beside me." "I almost did walk away," she confessed. "For one moment, I almost let their fear become my fear too." "But you didn't." "No," she said, smiling up at him, the old shame that had once defined so much of her life nowhere to be found in her expression now. "I have spent enough of my life letting other people decide who I was allowed to be. That morning, I finally decided for myself instead." Castor kissed her softly, there beneath the same moon that had once threatened to destroy him entirely, now shining down peacefully on the woman who had saved him, not through any prophecy or ancient magic alone, but through simple, stubborn courage that had refused to abandon someone in pain, even when the whole world told her to look away. The forgotten Omega, once shamed and hidden at the edges of her own small village, had become the queen of an entire kingdom, not because fate had chosen her, though it had, but because she had finally chosen herself. And in the years that followed, whenever new parents in Vermore found strange marks upon their newborn children, marks that once would have brought fear and shame into their homes, they thought instead of their queen, and taught their children a different lesson entirely. That the things which make us different are rarely curses at all. Sometimes, they are simply gifts, waiting patiently for the world to become wise enough to finally understand them.